What part of yourself did you abandon the first time you chose comfort over discipline and told yourself it was harmless because no one was watching and no one would know, and the damage felt invisible in the moment because it always does at the beginning? Ask yourself that before you listen any further, because this is not a story meant to entertain you. This is a mirror meant to expose you. What you tolerate is not neutral, it is not passive, it is not temporary, it is a vote cast daily for the person you are becoming. And most people never become anything by choice, they decay by permission. Marcus Aurelius warned you of this centuries ago when he wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, but he did not stop there, because thoughts are born from habits, and habits are formed by what you allow to remain unchallenged. You do not wake up one day weak, distracted, bitter, and undisciplined. You arrive there slowly, quietly, through tolerance, through excuses, through the small surrenders you told yourself did not matter. You tolerate the voice that says tomorrow instead of now, and tomorrow becomes your permanent address. You tolerate distraction, and soon your mind cannot sit still long enough to think a complete thought. You tolerate disrespect from others, and eventually you mirror it back at yourself through the way you live. Epictetus said that we are not disturbed by things but by the views we take of them, yet those views are shaped by what we repeatedly accept as normal. If chaos surrounds you long enough, you begin to call it life. If weakness lives within you long enough, you begin to call it personality. Seneca understood this deeply when he warned that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, yet we also rot more often through indulgence than through pain. Pain sharpens, indulgence softens, and softness is the quiet killer of human potential. Look at your life without romance, without excuses, without the lies you tell to sleep at night. What do you tolerate that you know is beneath you? The late nights spent feeding impulses that leave you emptier than before. The conversations you avoid because they require courage. The standards you lowered because enforcing them would make you lonely. Loneliness feels unbearable to the untrained mind, but the Stoics knew solitude was the forge of strength, not its enemy. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet reminded himself daily that he required very little to live well. He stripped life down to its essentials because excess weakens clarity. When you tolerate excess, you drown your ability to see yourself clearly. Every tolerated behavior trains your nervous system, your identity, your future reactions. The mind does not argue with repetition, it submits to it. Epictetus taught that freedom is not found in controlling external events, but in governing your responses. Yet how can you govern what you have already surrendered? Tolerance is surrender disguised as patience. It feels mature, it feels calm, it feels reasonable, but it is often cowardice wearing a mask. There is a difference between accepting reality and accepting mediocrity. One is wisdom, the other is self-betrayal. You say, "This is just how I am," but that is a confession, not a truth. You say, "This is how life is," but life reflects the discipline of the one living it. You say, "Everyone does this," but Marcus Aurelius would remind you that the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation, not because they must, but because they never question what they allow. The moment you stop questioning your tolerances, you sign a contract with decay. The Stoics did not preach comfort. They preached clarity, and clarity is ruthless. It asks you to see the cost of every habit, every thought, every excuse. Nothing is free. Everything has a price, and you are always paying, either now through discipline or later through regret. Consider how tolerance shapes character the way water shapes stone, not through force but through persistence. The stone does not notice the erosion until it is unrecognizable. You do not notice the erosion of your standards until you no longer recognize the person you once promised to become. Seneca warned that while we waste time hesitating, life passes. Tolerance wastes time not by stopping action, but by allowing the wrong action to continue. It keeps you busy but unfulfilled, moving but directionless, alive but not awake. You tolerate a weak morning routine, and soon your entire day bends around that weakness. You tolerate negative self-talk, and soon your ambition shrinks to fit the cage you built with your own words. Pain was never the enemy. The Stoics understood this. Pain is information. Pain reveals where growth is required. But tolerance numbs that signal. It teaches you to live with discomfort that should have been confronted. There is a difference between enduring hardship and enabling decay. Marcus Aurelius endured war, plague, betrayal, and loss, yet he never tolerated vice within himself. He treated his own mind as a battlefield more important than any external conflict. You fight the world while neglecting the war inside and wonder why you are exhausted. Ask yourself what you have been tolerating in the name of survival that is slowly killing your sense of purpose. The job that drains your spirit but pays the bills, the relationship that dulls your edge but feels familiar, the habits that give short relief but long damage. Stoicism does not tell you to abandon responsibility, it tells you to confront truth. Sometimes the truth is that the life you are tolerating is the very thing preventing you from becoming who you could be. Epictetus would say that if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Most people tolerate misery because confronting it would require the humility to admit they chose it. You become what you repeatedly permit, not what you occasionally desire. Desire is cheap, discipline is rare. The Stoics trained themselves daily not because they were broken, but because they understood human nature. Left untrained, the mind seeks comfort, avoids pain, exaggerates fear, and rationalizes weakness. This is not a flaw. It is a default. Discipline is the override. But discipline cannot coexist with tolerance of what degrades you. Every time you excuse a behavior, you strengthen it. Every time you delay a necessary action, you teach your mind that delay is acceptable. Soon delay becomes instinct. Look at how you react under pressure. That reaction was rehearsed long before the moment arrived. You rehearsed it by tolerating disorganization, laziness, resentment, and distraction. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. But this is only true if you do not tolerate the impediment as permanent. Obstacles are meant to be used, not lived with. When you tolerate the obstacle, you stop moving. There is a brutal honesty required to live well. It begins with asking, what am I allowing that is costing me my future? Not blaming society, not blaming trauma, not blaming fate. Stoicism does not deny suffering, it denies self-pity. Seneca lost wealth, faced exile, and lived under a tyrant. Yet he warned that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. Tolerance robs you of that proof. It keeps you untested and therefore unsure. Confidence is not built through affirmation, it is built through repeated refusal to accept weakness. The modern world profits from your tolerance. It wants you distract. Indulgent, passive and numb. It sells you comfort as freedom and calls discipline toxic. The Stoics would call this enslavement. Epictetus said that no man is free who is not master of himself. Ask yourself honestly, who is your master right now? Your impulses, your fears, your habits, your past. Whatever you tolerate commands you. You may think you are choosing, but tolerance is a choice made once and obeyed daily without question. This is where the shift begins, not with motivation, but with intolerance. Intolerance of lies you tell yourself, intolerance of habits that drain you, intolerance of environments that weaken you. This is not cruelty, it is self-respect. Marcus Aurelius respected himself enough to demand virtue in thought and action even when no one else was watching, especially when no one else was watching, because character is revealed in private tolerance, not public performance. Understand this clearly: your future is not decided by dramatic moments, but by quiet permissions. The person you will be in 5 years is already being shaped by what you allow today. Not what you dream about, not what you post about, not what you plan, but what you tolerate. This is the law the Stoics live by, whether they named it or not. You either train the mind or it trains you. You either choose discipline or you inherit decay. Sit with that discomfort, do not escape it. Let it burn, because that burn is awareness. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. You cannot change what you refuse to see, and you cannot see clearly while hiding behind tolerance. This is only the beginning. The deeper truths will demand more of you than you are comfortable giving. But comfort has never built anything worth becoming. The moment you become aware of what you tolerate, you feel an internal resistance because awareness threatens the comfort of unconscious living. The mind prefers familiarity over truth, even when that familiarity is poisonous. This is why most people sense what is wrong long before they change it. They feel the weight in their chest, the quiet dissatisfaction, the low-grade anxiety that never fully leaves. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul is harmed by false opinions, yet people cling to them because abandoning them would require responsibility. Responsibility is heavy because it removes the illusion that someone else is in control. Stoicism strips that illusion away with brutal precision. It places the burden of your life back into your own hands where it has always belonged. You tolerate disorder and then complain about chaos. You tolerate weakness and then resent strength in others. You tolerate mediocrity and then envy excellence. None of this is accidental. The Stoics understood that resentment is often the shadow cast by unexamined tolerance. When you allow something beneath you to persist, it begins to poison your perception. You start to justify it. You start to defend it. Eventually you build an identity around it. Epictetus warned that if you want to be invincible, make sure that nothing outside your will has power over you. Yet tolerance hands power away quietly without a fight. It says, "This is fine, I can live with this, I will adjust." Adjustment becomes adaptation, and adaptation becomes identity. There is a difference between endurance and submission. Endurance is conscious, chosen, aligned with virtue and purpose. Submission is unconscious, reactive, driven by fear of discomfort. The Stoics endured hardship with clarity, not passivity. They did not tolerate what corrupted the soul. Seneca wrote that luxury weakens the mind and comfort dulls ambition. He lived surrounded by wealth, yet warned constantly against being owned by it. Ownership is subtle. You think you possess something, but the moment you cannot live without it, it possesses you. Tolerance works the same way. You think you are allowing something, but eventually it is allowing you to exist within its boundaries. Look at the excuses you repeat. They are not random. They are rehearsed defenses protecting what you refuse to release. I am tired. I deserve this. Now is not the right time. It is not that bad. Others have it worse. These phrases are not harmless. They are rituals of self-sabotage. Marcus Aurelius told himself daily that he would meet selfish, jealous, and ignorant people not to grow bitter, but to remain disciplined in response. He prepared his mind because preparation reduces tolerance for weakness. When you expect challenge, you train strength. When you expect ease, you tolerate decay. The most dangerous tolerance is tolerance of internal disorder. A cluttered mind, a reactive temperament, uncontrolled emotion. You excuse it by saying that is just how you feel. The Stoics did not deny feeling, they denied being ruled by it. Epictetus taught that feelings are impressions, not commands, yet tolerance turns impressions into laws. You feel angry, so you act angry. You feel unmotivated, so you stop. You feel afraid, so you retreat. Over time, your life becomes a map of your unchallenged emotions. Discipline interrupts this chain, but discipline begins with refusal. Refusal to let feelings dictate action. Refusal to let impulses decide identity. Most people believe change requires intensity, but Stoicism teaches that consistency is more powerful than force. You do not need to violently uproot your life. You need to stop feeding what is killing it. Stop tolerating the small things and the big things lose power. Stop tolerating disorder and clarity emerges. Stop tolerating disrespect and boundaries form. Stop tolerating excuses and momentum builds. This is not glamorous. It is repetitive, quiet, and often uncomfortable. That is why few do it. The Stoics were not admired for comfort. They were respected for resolve. Your environment is a mirror of your tolerance. The people you keep, the habits you maintain, the standards you enforce or ignore. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he could leave life at any moment, and that knowledge sharpened his priorities. Mortality clarifies intolerance. When time is finite, tolerance becomes expensive. Ask yourself if you would still tolerate what you do if you truly believed this year mattered. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it. Tolerance is a form of waste because it consumes time without producing growth. There is fear beneath tolerance. Fear of confrontation, fear of failure, fear of loneliness, fear of effort. Stoicism does not eliminate fear, it teaches you to act despite it. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to let fear decide. Every tolerated weakness is a fear left unchallenged, and fear grows when fed. You avoid the hard conversation, so fear grows. You avoid discipline, so fear grows. You avoid responsibility, so fear grows. Soon fear becomes your advisor, and tolerance becomes your strategy. Understand this clearly: the mind adapts to whatever you repeatedly expose it to. If you expose it to challenge, it becomes resilient. If you expose it to ease, it becomes fragile. Marcus Aurelius trained his mind like a soldier because he knew softness invites collapse. The Stoics saw civilization rise and fall. They saw men broken by excess, not scarcity. They knew that the greatest threats come not from hardship, but from indulgence. Indulgence teaches the mind that it deserves comfort without effort. That belief is lethal. You may think tolerance keeps the peace, but it often creates long-term conflict. You avoid short-term discomfort and inherit long-term dissatisfaction. You avoid discipline now and face regret later. Stoicism is the art of choosing the right discomfort. Voluntary hardship builds strength, involuntary suffering breaks it. When you tolerate what weakens you, you choose involuntary suffering in the future. When you impose discipline now, you choose voluntary hardship that strengthens you. Look at your daily rituals. They reveal your philosophy more accurately than your words. Do you rise with intention or drift into the day? Do you train your body or neglect it? Do you sharpen your mind or numb it? Do you reflect or distract? Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not for publication but for correction. He used writing to confront his own tolerance for weakness. He did not spare himself. That is why his words still cut centuries later. Truth does not age. This path is lonely at first because intolerance of weakness separates you from the comfortable majority. You will be misunderstood. You will be called extreme, rigid, cold. Seneca warned that the crowd is a dangerous place for virtue because it normalizes vice. But solitude in discipline builds inner order, and inner order creates a quiet confidence that does not seek validation. When you no longer tolerate your own excuses, the opinions of others lose power. You are not broken, you are untrained. And training begins with standards. Standards are not expectations of perfection. They are boundaries of self-respect. What you tolerate sets those boundaries. If you tolerate laziness, you tell your mind effort is optional. If you tolerate dishonesty, you tell your mind truth is negotiable. If you tolerate chaos, you tell your mind order is unnecessary. The mind believes what you demonstrate, not what you declare. This is the deeper truth the Stoics lived by. You become what you practice, not what you preach. Practice begins with refusal. Refusal is uncomfortable because it disrupts patterns. But patterns are exactly what you are here to break. The person you are now is the result of tolerated patterns. The person you could become exists on the other side of disciplined refusal. This is not transformation, it is reclamation. You are not adding anything, you are removing what never belonged. As this awareness deepens, resistance will rise. The mind will bargain, it will minimize, it will delay. This is normal. Epictetus would tell you to observe these reactions without obeying them. You are not your thoughts, you are the one who decides which thoughts earn action. That decision defines character, and character defines destiny more reliably than talent, luck, or circumstance. What you tolerate is who you become because tolerance trains identity, but identity is not fixed. It is negotiated daily through action and inaction. You are negotiating right now, whether consciously or not. The question is no longer whether tolerance shapes you. The question is whether you will continue to let it do so without your consent. The moment you decide to withdraw tolerance from what weakens you, the mind reacts as if threatened because it is. You are not just changing behavior, you are challenging an identity that has been quietly forming for years. The ego resists not because the old ways are good, but because they are familiar. Marcus Aurelius warned himself that change feels like injury to the untrained mind, even when it is healing. The discomfort you feel when you stop tolerating something destructive is not a sign of loss, it is a sign of withdrawal. You are pulling nourishment away from habits that depended on your permission to survive. Most people misinterpret this phase. They assume the resistance means they are doing something wrong. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Resistance is evidence that you have touched something real. Epictetus said that no great thing is created suddenly. The mind must be hardened gradually against difficulty. Yet tolerance has softened it for years. You cannot expect immediate calm when you remove the very things that kept you numb. Clarity is loud at first. It exposes everything you have been avoiding. That exposure feels brutal because truth does not negotiate. You begin to see how deeply tolerance infiltrated your thinking, not just in obvious habits but in subtle assumptions. The assumption that you need motivation before action, the assumption that discipline is oppressive, the assumption that life is supposed to feel good most of the time. The Stoics rejected these assumptions entirely. They did not measure a good life by pleasure, but by alignment with virtue. Virtue is not comfortable, it is precise. It demands effort, even when you are tired, honesty, even when it costs you, and restraint, even when no one would blame you for indulgence. Seneca wrote that the body should be treated rigorously so that it does not become disobedient to the mind. Modern life reverses this relationship. The mind obeys the body. Hunger dictates action, fatigue dictates priorities, emotion dictates truth. This inversion is the result of tolerance. You tolerate bodily impulses overruling rational judgment, and eventually reason grows quiet. Self-mastery is not about suppression. It is about hierarchy. Reason must lead. When it does not, chaos follows. Look closely at how tolerance distorts time. When you tolerate discomfort avoidance, time stretches endlessly. Tomorrow always exists, later feels safe. But when you remove tolerance, urgency sharpens. Marcus Aurelius lived with constant awareness of death, not as morbidity, but as focus. He reminded himself that he could leave life right now and that awareness stripped excuses of their power. Mortality is the ultimate intolerance. It does not negotiate, it does not wait, it does not care about your comfort. The Stoic uses this truth not to panic, but to prioritize. When you truly accept that your time is finite, tolerance becomes expensive. You start to feel the cost of wasted hours, weak habits, and shallow pursuits. This feeling is uncomfortable but necessary. It is the pain of alignment returning. You cannot live with clarity and tolerance for self-betrayal at the same time. One must die. Most people choose clarity to die because tolerance feels easier in the short term. The Stoics chose differently. They accepted short-term discomfort to avoid long-term regret. There is also a social cost to intolerance of weakness. When you raise your standards, you expose the low standards of those around you. This creates tension. People prefer your tolerance because it validates their own. When you stop tolerating what degrades you, some will feel judged even if you say nothing. Seneca warned that living rightly often invites hostility, not because you attack others, but because your discipline reflects what they avoid. This is not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for the comfort of those who choose stagnation. Epictetus taught that you must decide what kind of person you wish to be and then act accordingly, even if it costs you relationships, status, or approval. This decision cannot be partial. Partial commitment is another form of tolerance. You either refuse to let weakness rule you, or you negotiate with it forever. Negotiation always ends the same way. Weakness asks for more. It is never satisfied. Discipline, on the other hand, strengthens with use. The more you choose it, the easier it becomes, not because it becomes comfortable, but because you become capable. As tolerance fades, discipline reveals its true nature. It is not a burst of intensity, but a quiet consistency. It is doing what must be done without drama. Marcus Aurelius rose each morning, reminding himself that he was made to work like a bee, not to sleep like an animal. He did not romanticize effort, he normalized it. When effort is normal, tolerance for laziness disappears naturally. You stop arguing with yourself. Action becomes routine. This is freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from internal conflict. Internal conflict is the tax of tolerance. When part of you wants more and another part resists effort, the result is friction. This friction drains energy, creates anxiety, and erodes confidence. The Stoics sought harmony within. Harmony does not mean ease, it means alignment. When your actions match your values, tension dissolves even when the work is hard. You feel tired but not conflicted. You feel challenged but not ashamed. Shame thrives in tolerance because you know you are betraying yourself but continue anyway. The mind begins to sharpen when tolerance is removed. Attention lengthens, distractions lose appeal. You start noticing how shallow stimulation once controlled you. This can feel unsettling because you realize how much of your life was spent escaping rather than engaging. But this awareness is power. Seneca warned against being everywhere and nowhere at once. He believed that scattered attention leads to a scattered soul. Tolerance of distraction fragments identity. Discipline reunifies it. There will be moments when you want to return to tolerance because it feels easier. The Stoics anticipated this. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind will seek to escape effort by inventing reasons. He trained himself to catch those reasons before they hardened into beliefs. You must do the same. Observe the thought that says just this once. That thought has a history. It has led you to where you are now. You already know its outcome. Do not pretend otherwise. This is not about perfection. The Stoics were not perfectionists. They were realists. They knew failure was inevitable, but tolerance of failure was optional. When you fail without tolerance, you correct quickly. When you fail with tolerance, you linger. The difference is everything. Discipline is not never falling. It is refusing to stay down. Tolerance invites you to lie there and call it rest. As this process continues, you begin to feel a quiet authority within yourself. Not arrogance, not aggression, but certainty. You trust your word because you keep it. You trust your judgment because it is not clouded by indulgence. This trust is the foundation of self-respect, and self-respect is the source of resilience. When you respect yourself, suffering does not destroy you, it refines you. Marcus Aurelius endured immense pressure because he trusted his own discipline more than external circumstances. You also begin to see others more clearly. Without judgment, without superiority, you recognize tolerance patterns because you lived them. This breeds compassion but not indulgence. Stoic compassion does not mean enabling weakness. It means understanding human nature while refusing to excuse decay. You can empathize without imitating. You can love without lowering standards. This balance is rare and powerful. What you are doing now is not self-improvement. It is self-governance. You are reclaiming authority over your own mind. Epictetus believed that this was the highest form of power available to a human being. External power fades, wealth vanishes, reputation shifts. Self-command endures. But it must be defended daily. Tolerance is always waiting to return, wearing new disguises. Fatigue, success, justification, even humility can become excuses if left unchecked. This path does not end. There is no final state where tolerance disappears forever. Stoicism is a practice, not a destination. But each day you refuse to tolerate what degrades you, the easier refusal becomes. The mind learns, the soul steadies, life simplifies. And in that simplicity, strength grows. You are no longer asking who you could become. You are deciding who you will no longer tolerate being. And that decision changes everything. The first step in breaking free from what weakens you is noticing it. Noticing without rationalization, without minimization, without the comforting lies. The mind tells itself to preserve ease. Every tolerated behavior, every unchallenged impulse, is a silent vote for the life you are building, whether you see it or not. Marcus Aurelius understood that perception shapes action, and action shapes destiny. He reminded himself constantly that the soul is dyed by the color of its thoughts, yet he also knew that thought itself is molded by what we allow to persist. Tolerance is the silent sculptor of identity. You may call it patience or prudence, but in reality it is surrender masquerading as virtue. You tolerate your anger, your fear, your envy, and they grow roots deep into the mind. You tolerate distractions that sap your focus and your creativity, and the spirit weakens under the weight of fragmented attention. You tolerate mediocrity because it is easy, and the easy always lulls the mind into complacency. Epictetus warned that freedom is mastery over the self, not freedom from circumstance. And yet, every act of tolerance is a step toward captivity. You are never neutral. Every allowance builds the framework of your future self, and the person you are tolerating is the one you are becoming. Observe how subtle tolerance can be. It wears the face of reasonableness. It whispers that compromise is maturity, that patience is wisdom, that the world is complicated and must be navigated carefully. But the Stoics saw the truth behind this deception. These are the chains of the untrained mind. Seneca wrote that life is long enough, but most men waste it in trivialities, in weakness, in avoidance. Every tolerated impulse, every unexamined habit is a thread in the tapestry of wasted life. And it is not external circumstance that binds you, it is internal allowance. The mind obeys what it repeatedly experiences. When you tolerate indulgence, the mind learns that comfort is a reward for effortlessness. When you tolerate fear, the mind learns that hesitation is safe. When you tolerate resentment, the mind learns to feed on the bitterness of imagined injuries. This is not theory, it is law. You are not fighting some external enemy, you are confronting yourself. Marcus Aurelius waged a lifelong campaign against his own impulses. Epictetus trained his mind to treat externals as indifferent. Seneca disciplined himself to endure adversity with composure. They knew that toleration is the soil in which weakness thrives. Every tolerated lie, every tolerated excuse, every tolerated distraction is an act of betrayal. You may call it minor, insignificant, harmless, but that is the lie tolerance tells you to keep you comfortable. Comfort is not neutral. It is a slow death, a quiet erosion of potential. You may not notice its progress until years later, when the habits you allowed define the limits of your ambition, your character, your life. You tolerate mediocrity, and suddenly it becomes your identity. You tolerate disorganization, and your thoughts scatter. Your decisions weaken, your clarity vanishes. The Stoics did not seek comfort, they sought alignment. Alignment between reason and action, between virtue and life. This is why their lives feel timeless, why their words cut through centuries. Marcus Aurelius endured war, plague, betrayal, and loss, yet he remained disciplined, calm, unyielding in thought. Epictetus, once a slave, became a master of his mind. Seneca, wealthy and politically entangled, refused indulgence from corrupting his due. D.G. meant. None of them tolerated weakness within themselves. None excused delay or rationalized compromise when it betrayed principle. Notice how much of your own suffering comes from what you tolerate. You tolerate the chaos in your mind, the clutter in your environment, the distractions that fragment your attention, the impulses that override reason. You tolerate indulgence in your body, indulgence in your thoughts, indulgence in your emotions, and every tolerance comes with a price. It does not feel immediate, but it compounds. Small permissions accumulate into monumental constraints. The Stoics knew this. That is why their practice was relentless. Every day a check, every moment a choice, every act a reaffirmation of discipline over indulgence. Discipline is not heroism, it is consistency. Discipline is not a burst of effort, it is repeated refusal to tolerate the things that erode you. You do not wait for life to demand virtue, you impose it upon yourself. You do not wait for circumstances to force courage, you cultivate it relentlessly. You do not wait for suffering to sculpt your soul, you confront what weakens you so that suffering, when it comes, becomes a tool rather than a destroyer. Now feel the weight of truth. The person you are becoming is already present in your tolerated behaviors. The distractions you allow, the excuses you justify, the impulses you indulge, they are shaping you every day. And if you continue without intervention, the person you tolerate will become the person you are. Ask yourself, is that who you wish to be? The answer, if you are honest, will burn. And that burn is not punishment, it is awakening. Stoicism is never cruel, it is never arbitrary, it is a mirror. And mirrors, when confronted, illuminate what you have avoided. There is no shortcut here. No motivational fix, no external validation, no temporary inspiration. The Stoics lived this truth, and you must live it too. The mind must be trained, the character must be forged, and indulgence must be refused. You must see every tolerated weakness as an adversary, every tolerated distraction as a thief, every tolerated excuse as betrayal, because that is exactly what they are. The cost of continued tolerance is measured not in days but in the years, in the opportunities, in the clarity you will never reclaim. Begin by observing without judgment, by naming what you have allowed, by refusing it intentionally, not tomorrow, not later, now. The moment of refusal is the moment of power. Marcus Aurelius did not wait for perfect conditions. Epictetus did not wait for freedom. Seneca did not wait for clarity. They acted within the moment, within themselves, within what was possible, and in that action they reclaimed their souls from the slow erosion of tolerance. This is the threshold you stand upon. Beyond it lies clarity, discipline, and sovereignty over yourself. But crossing it requires brutal honesty, relentless observation, and unwavering refusal to allow what corrupts you. There is no comfort in this work, no indulgence, no leniency. There is only the truth and the power you reclaim by facing it. Tolerate nothing, excuse nothing, rationalize nothing. Let every moment of consciousness sharpen your awareness, strengthen your will, and solidify your identity. This is the path of the Stoics. This is the reclaiming of what is rightfully yours, a mind uncorrupted, a soul disciplined, a life shaped not by the negligence of tolerance, but by the deliberate, uncompromising choice of virtue. You are no longer permitted to drift. You are no longer permitted to surrender. The person you will become depends entirely on what you refuse to tolerate. From this moment forward, the process of removing tolerance is not subtle. It is violent in its quiet insistence, a relentless confrontation with every corner of your mind where indulgence, distraction, and weakness have been allowed to take root. Marcus Aurelius faced armies, betrayal, disease, and death, yet his fiercest battles were always within. The human mind, left untrained, is a cunning adversary. It disguises surrender as patience, indulgence as comfort, procrastination as prudence. Every tolerated impulse grows stronger over time, and every moment of avoidance embeds weakness deeper into the fabric of your identity. You may think you are harmlessly tolerating minor errors, but minor errors are not minor when compounded daily. They shape your habits, your character, your destiny. Consider how fear infiltrates tolerance. Fear of discomfort, fear of confrontation, fear of failure, fear of being misunderstood. All of these are subtle teachers, instructing the mind to avoid the work it most needs to do. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by events, but by the opinions we form about them. Yet these opinions are molded by what we tolerate. You tolerate fear, and fear becomes law. You tolerate laziness, and inaction becomes instinct. You tolerate dishonesty in thought, word, or deed, and deception becomes identity. Every tolerated weakness is an unpaid toll levied upon your future self. Notice the social dimension of tolerance. People tolerate your mediocrity because it validates their own. They tolerate your indulgence because it relieves them of facing their own. The crowd prefers a mind and character dulled by repeated concessions to ease. To refuse tolerance is to separate yourself from the familiar, to confront discomfort openly, and to become an anomaly. Seneca warned that virtue is dangerous, not because it provokes others, but because it exposes what they avoid seeing in themselves. When you refuse to tolerate what weakens you, you illuminate weakness everywhere it exists, including within those around you. That illumination will be met with resistance. Do not shrink, do not yield. The mind is trained by repeated action, not by occasional bursts of effort. Discipline is not heroic, it is habitual, It is the refusal, over and over, to indulge what would otherwise erode you. You do not merely stop tolerating weakness, you act to replace it with strength, clarity, and precision. Marcus Aurelius wrote daily not to inspire others, but to discipline himself, to enforce standards upon his own character. That is the path you must follow. Remove tolerance from the things that have been diluting your mind, your body, and your soul, and replace it with deliberate, conscious action. Each refusal, each small victory over indulgence, compounds into a fortress of self-mastery. Do not underestimate the subtle power of tolerated habits. A morning delayed by a few minutes, a conversation avoided, a promise broken silently to yourself, each is a stone laid in the foundation of a weaker self. Epictetus said that we are not given life as a playground, it is a battlefield where our reason must govern impulses. When you tolerate, you surrender the battlefield. You allow chaos to occupy your mind and dictate your choices. You trade sovereignty for comfort, security for passivity, and the cost is invisibly accumulated until one day you awaken and realize you are a stranger to yourself. Pain is not the enemy. Discomfort is not punishment. Stoicism does not seek to avoid suffering, it seeks to make the soul resilient to it. Every tolerated weakness is a missed opportunity to transform suffering into growth. Seneca wrote that adversity introduces a man to himself, yet if you tolerate what diminishes you, adversity arrives as a blow rather than a teacher. Toleration teaches the mind to retreat. Discipline teaches the mind to advance. The difference is the difference between a life that is endured and a life that is commanded. Your inner life mirrors your outer life, because what you tolerate internally manifests externally. Laziness tolerated in thought becomes lethargy in action. Negativity tolerated in perception becomes bitterness in expression. Distraction tolerated in attention becomes fragmentation in achievement. The Stoics knew this intimately. The mind is a kingdom, and tolerance of vice is a silent usurper that seizes authority without a battle. Only deliberate refusal and consistent cultivation of virtue can reclaim the throne. Recognize the cost of delay. Every moment you tolerate, every excuse you accept, every rationalization you invent, compounds the weight of future suffering. Marcus Aurelius reflected daily on the brevity of life, on mortality, on the fleetingness of every opportunity. If you lived as if each day were a gift, because it is, you would see that tolerance is a theft of time, a theft of potential, a theft of identity. Refuse that theft. Refuse it now. Let the mind feel the discomfort of confrontation, the sting of discipline, the rigor of deliberate action. Only through this confrontation can clarity be reclaimed. Do not confuse tolerance with patience, and do not confuse indulgence with mercy. Patience is a measured, conscious endurance aligned with purpose. Indulgence tolerated under the guise of kindness is cowardice dressed in virtue. Epictetus reminded that self-command is the highest good, and it is exercised not when convenient, but when inconvenient. Every tolerated weakness is a postponement of self-command. Every delayed action is a widening gap between who you are and who you could be. The gap grows silently, invisibly, until it feels unbridgeable, but it is bridgeable through uncompromising discipline and daily refusal. You have tolerated much, perhaps too much, perhaps unknowingly. Yet awareness itself is a step of power. Awareness illuminates the patterns, the choices, the concessions that have shaped you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, not to lament the world, but to confront the self. This is your task now. Confront every tolerated thought, every permitted indulgence, every justified compromise. Expose them to the light of reason and measure them against virtue. Allow no concession that erodes character. Replace passive endurance with active mastery. You will feel resistance, frustration, anger, and even despair. These are signs that the mind has been lulled by years of toleration. But Stoicism teaches that the mind can be forged by voluntary hardship. Pain endured deliberately strengthens. Discomfort accepted willingly teaches. Suffering confronted consciously refines. Every refusal to tolerate what undermines you is a strike of the hammer against the iron of your character. Persist, relent. Do not yield. The work is invisible, but the results are monumental. Your life is already being written by what you tolerate. Every morning you awaken, every decision you make, every habit you indulge or resist, these are the strokes of your authoring hand. Refuse to permit weakness. Refuse to permit distraction. Refuse to purr. MIT, compromise. Cultivate strength, clarity, courage, and discipline. Let the mind and body be instruments of deliberate mastery rather than theaters of passive surrender. This is the Stoic path. This is the reclaiming of authority over self. This is the work that defines destiny. The mind resists the removal of tolerance because it has learned comfort, and comfort is a drug more addictive than any external pleasure. You may think that what you have allowed is harmless because it does not demand your attention in the moment, but that is the illusion tolerance always creates. Marcus Aurelius reflected constantly on the fleeting nature of life and the importance of self-governance, yet even he had to battle the mind's quiet desire to linger in softness. The human mind left untrained will always find reasons to justify delay, to excuse indulgence, to rationalize weakness. Each tolerated compromise whispers, "It is small, it will not matter, it can wait." But small tolerances compound into monumental concessions. The person you tolerate in yourself becomes the person you wake up as tomorrow. Consider how distraction works. You tolerate a wandering mind, and soon focus becomes rare. You tolerate scattered attention, and clarity recedes. You tolerate idle indulgence, and action becomes optional. Epictetus taught that freedom is only achieved when nothing external commands the mind. Yet every tolerated weakness hands control to what is unworthy: fear, laziness, envy, craving. Each concession trains the mind to obey what erodes you. This is why the majority of humans live unremarkable lives. They tolerate mediocrity until it becomes identity. You do not become mediocre in one night. You tolerate it day after day until it inhabits every corner of your being. Look closely at your habits. The ones you permit without challenge shape your destiny more than the ones you force you. A self-to-do. Seneca warned that it is not death we should fear, but a life wasted in surrender to what does not matter. Tolerance of triviality builds a life devoid of meaning. Tolerance of indulgence erodes the body. Tolerance of thoughtlessness fragments the mind. The Stoics were relentless because they understood that the smallest permissions accumulate invisibly teaching the soul weakness until one day it dominates. Every tolerated habit is a lesson in decay. Resistance arises naturally when you remove tolerance. The mind rebels because it has been conditioned to obey comfort rather than reason. Marcus Aurelius fought this in himself daily, reminding that he was made to work, endure, and act virtuously, not to seek pleasure or ease. He did not merely avoid indulgence, he trained his mind to desire what was necessary for virtue. Discipline is a skill, a muscle that strengthens with repeated exercise. Tolerance weakens it, and indulgence atrophies it entirely. Every act of refusal builds the architecture of self-mastery. You tolerate fear, and it grows. You tolerate indecision, and it solidifies. You tolerate laziness, and it becomes instinct. The mind obeys what is repeated. You are being sculpted by your tolerances every moment, even if you are unaware. Epictetus reminded that it is not the events that disturb men, but their judgments about them. Yet judgments are cultivated over years of tolerated thought. Allow fear to dictate, and you become its servant. Allow excuses to dictate, and you become its prisoner. Allow indulgence to dictate, and you become its plaything. True courage is not an occasional display, but the daily refusal to yield to what undermines you. The Stoics did not speak of heroism as spectacle, they spoke of steadfastness, consistency, and integrity of thought and action. Seneca wrote that the mind trained by discipline can endure what the untrained mind collapses under. Remove tolerance from your impulses, and suddenly every choice becomes an exercise in sovereignty. You feel discomfort because you are confronting the unformed self, the tolerated self, the weak self that has been allowed to linger unchallenged. That discomfort is proof that you are alive, that you are training, that you are reclaiming authority. Observe your environment. It reflects what you tolerate internally. Disorder tolerated within becomes clutter tolerated externally. Confusion tolerated in thought becomes chaos tolerated in action. Relationships tolerated for convenience become influence tolerated over your will. You may imagine that external change is optional, but the Stoics knew internal discipline always manifests outwardly. You are never isolated from the consequences of what you allow. Each tolerated flaw is a seed sown, destined to bear fruit you must one day confront. The removal of tolerance sharpens perception. You notice where the mind had been asleep, where habits had been unchallenged, where decisions had been postponed. Marcus Aurelius constantly observed himself, confronting his own impulses, rehearsing responses to challenges before they arrived. He did not allow weakness to remain unexamined. You must do the same. Observe the patterns, name them, refuse them, and replace them with action aligned to virtue. Only through this daily confrontation does freedom emerge. Only through disciplined refusal does mastery solidify. You will experience frustration, even rage, at the habits you discover you have tolerated for years. This is natural. Anger is a signal that your mind is awakening, that the mask of comfort is being stripped away. Epictetus taught that impressions are not commands. Observe the feeling without obeying it. Let the anger illuminate where tolerance had ruled, but do not act as the tolerat. Ed self would have acted. Instead, act as the self that refuses compromise, that commands attention, that insists on clarity, that pursues virtue relentlessly. Understand that the person you are becoming is being forged at this very moment, in the crucible of refusal. Every tolerated weakness excised, every indulgence denied, every excuse confronted is a strike of the hammer against the mold of mediocrity. Seneca wrote that fortune does not control the wise control themselves. Your tolerated habits were fortune masquerading as choice. Refuse them, replace them with deliberate action. Train the mind, sharpen the body, discipline the emotions. The Stoic path is not easy, it is not forgiving, it does not flatter. It is brutal, unrelenting, and exacting, and it works. Each day without tolerance is a day of sovereignty reclaimed. Each moment of clarity gained through refusal is a foundation for the person you are building. You are not changing circumstance. You are commanding yourself. You are not escaping suffering. You are converting it into strength. You are not avoiding death. You are using the finitude of life to sharpen priorities. Tolerate nothing within yourself that would undermine this process. Observe, confront, refuse, act. This is Stoic mastery. This is self-governance. This is the reclamation of a life deliberately lived, free from the quiet tyranny of tolerance. Every tolerated weakness has a hidden cost, one that the mind cleverly hides from awareness. You tolerate distraction and lose focus without noticing the subtle erosion of your potential. You tolerate fear and shrink without realizing that each step backward has been quietly teaching avoidance as instinct. You tolerate indulgence and comfort and do not see the slow atrophy of your willpower until one day, when faced with true adversity, you are unprepared. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes what it constantly thinks and acts upon. But tolerance allows the unworthy to linger, and the soul is dyed in the muted colors of concession. You have tolerated much because it is easy, because it is painless in the moment. But ease is the enemy of greatness, and pain is the tuition of mastery. Notice the patterns you have allowed in your own life. Late nights indulging fleeting pleasures, hours lost in distraction, habits left unexamined because they felt minor, trivial, or inevitable. Epictetus said that it is not the external things that disturb us, but the judgments we form about them. Yet these judgments are cultivated over years of toleration. Tolerate laziness, and the mind becomes obedient to inertia. Tolerate dishonesty, and the conscience grows weak. Tolerate chaos, and your inner order collapses. Small allowances accumulate like grains of sand, and one day the mountain is built, shaping a person you barely recognize. Every act of refusal is an assertion of sovereignty. Every denial of indulgence is a reclaiming of power over self. The Stoics did not see virtue as abstract. They saw it as concrete, enforceable, actionable. Marcus Aurelius reflected constantly, reminding himself that the world is beyond his control, but the mind is not. Epictetus taught that freedom is mastery over self. Seneca reminded that adversity reveals the strength within. Your tolerated habits and weaknesses are the chains you forged for yourself, but you have the hammer. Discipline is your tool. Awareness is the spark. Action is the fire that melts the bonds. Tolerance teaches complacency, and complacency corrupts clarity. The mind that tolerates distraction cannot focus on what matters. The soul that tolerates indulgence cannot endure suffering. The body that tolerates weakness cannot execute purpose. Every concession you make silently communicates to yourself, this is axe table, this can remain. And each day that you obey this quiet instruction, you give more authority to weakness, more territory to fear, more space to distraction. Seneca warned that it is not life that is short, but that we waste it. Tolerance is the most insidious form of waste because it masquerades as harmlessness while it quietly erodes potential. You will feel the discomfort of confrontation as you begin to refuse tolerance. The mind will resist. Old patterns will whisper their lies. You are too harsh. You deserve this. Tomorrow will be better. Do not listen. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that ease is not wisdom and that virtue requires effort. Epictetus advised that impressions are not commands. Observe them without obeying. You are not being cruel to yourself. You are being honest. You are not denying pleasure. You are prioritizing mastery. Each moment of refusal, though uncomfortable, strengthens the will, sharpens the mind, and purifies the soul. Observe how fear thrives in tolerance. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of solitude. All of these were nurtured by concessions you allowed. You tolerated weakness, and fear took root. You tolerated laziness, and fear grew unchecked. You tolerated indecision, and fear dictated action. Stoicism teaches that fear is natural, but obedience to it is optional. Courage is built not when it is convenient, but when the mind is forced to act in spite of discomfort. Every tolerated fear is an opportunity lost, and every confrontation of fear is a step into sovereignty. Consider the environment you maintain, the people you tolerate, the habits you accept, the standards you lower. These are all reflections of your inner state. Marcus Aurelius understood that a disciplined mind produces a disciplined life. Epictetus recognized that freedom begins within. Seneca emphasized that the unexamined life is wasted. When you tolerate what diminishes you internally, it manifests externally. Disorder, mediocrity, and distraction multiply silently until they dominate your existence. To reclaim self-mastery, you must refuse tolerance not only inwardly but outwardly. Discipline is the antidote to tolerance. It is not a momentary surge of will, it is repeated, deliberate, unrelenting action. The Stoics were relentless because they knew that weakness grows quietly, invisibly, and that strength requires daily affirmation. You will stumble, you will relapse, you will feel exhaustion, frustration, even despair. This is normal. Seneca wrote that life's challenges are meant to test and refine the soul. Tolerance allows weakness to hide behind excuses. Discipline refuses excuses. Discipline confronts reality, chooses action, and enforces integrity. The practice is rigorous, the results profound. You must see clearly every tolerated habit, every indulgence, every delay, every concession shapes the person you are becoming. The person you tolerate now is the person you inherit tomorrow. The stakes are absolute. There is no neutrality in tolerance. There is no harmless exception. Each allowance either trains weakness or nurtures strength. Marcus Aurelius did not tolerate weakness in thought or deed. Epictetus did not tolerate unexamined impressions. Seneca did not tolerate indulgence of the mind, body, or spirit. Their refusal to tolerate what degraded them became their power. Now is your moment. Observe the tolerated self. Identify every concession, every excuse, every indulgence. Do not justify, do not rationalize, do not postpone. Refuse it. Replace it with deliberate action aligned with reason, virtue, and purpose. Discipline is not optional. Sovereignty over the self is not negotiable. The Stoics teach that mastery is built daily, in the repetition of refusal, in the enforcement of boundaries against weakness, in the cultivation of clarity, courage, and endurance. Tolerate nothing that undermines your soul, and act with relentless consistency. This is the forge where the self is made. The moment has arrived when nothing can be tolerated any longer. The indulgences, the distractions, the compromises, the small surrenders you have whispered to yourself as harmless, they are gone now, in your awareness, exposed for what they truly are. Thefts of your power, betrayals of your potential, chains around your mind and spirit. Marcus Aurelius would remind you that life is fleeting, that every day surrendered to ease is a day stolen from virtue. Epictetus would insist that freedom is claimed only when the mind refuses the dictates of weakness. Seneca would warn that the unexamined tolerance of minor faults multiplies into a lifetime of regret. You are standing at the precipice, confronted with the raw truth. What you tolerate is who you are becoming, and there is no neutral path forward. Every concession you have allowed in thought, in habit, in action, has been training the self you do not wish to inhabit. You tolerated distraction and your focus waned. You tolerated fear and courage atrophied. You tolerated mediocrity and ambition quietly shrank. Every tolerated lie, every excuse, every indulgence has silently constructed a life of quiet compromise, a soul molded to the contours of convenience rather than strength. But now, understanding has arrived. Awareness is the first strike against weakness, and action is the hammer that must follow. You are no longer a passive observer of your own decline. Stoicism demands active confrontation. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action becomes the way, yet the obstacle that is tolerated becomes the jailer. The very impulses, habits, and indulgences you have allowed to persist must be met with deliberate refusal every day, in every moment. There is no negotiation with weakness. There is no compromise with distraction. There is no indulgence for fear. The self you will become depends entirely upon the boundaries you enforce now. Feel the weight of your own potential pressing against the limitations you have tolerated. It is uncomfortable because growth is uncomfortable. It is intense because truth is intense. It is uncompromising because you are the architect of your own life, and architecture requires precision, not laziness. Every act of refusal, very disciplined choice, every confrontation with internal resistance sharpens the mind and fortifies the spirit. Tolerate nothing that undermines clarity. Accept no behavior that diminishes strength. Admit no excuse that weakens resolve. Your sovereignty over yourself is absolute, but it requires vigilance and ruthless consistency. The call of the Stoic is not a gentle whisper but a command. Reclaim the self that has been surrendered to indulgence. Observe every impulse, every emotion, every habitual compromise, and do not yield. Marcus Aurelius disciplined himself to act rightly regardless of external conditions. Epictetus taught that no external circumstance can harm the mind that governs itself. Seneca insisted that virtue is demonstrated in the refusal to indulge what corrupts. You must act with this same rigor. What you have tolerated in the past has shaped you, but it does not have to define you. Your future is forged in conscious, unyielding refusal. Now, confront the habits you have justified. Confront the fears you have hidden from. Confront the distractions you have allowed to scatter your attention. Confront the self you have been tolerating and dismantle it piece by piece. This is the work of mastery. It is not glamorous. It is not easy. It is precise, relentless, and uncompromising. But it is the only path to becoming a person who is free from the slow tyranny of tolerance, a person whose mind and character are forged in deliberate choice rather than passive surrender. Do not seek comfort, do not seek approval, do not seek ease, seek clarity, seek discipline, seek sovereignty over your own mind. Every moment spent tolerating weakness is a moment lost forever. Every indulgence is a lesson in decay. Every excuse is a teacher of compromise. Refuse them all. Replace them with deliberate action, rigorous thought, and consistent, unwavering practice of virtue. This is the work that defines destiny. This is the Stoic path of reclaiming what is yours, mastery over the self, strength of mind and clarity of purpose. And now, rise. Rise above every tolerated weakness. Rise above every indulgence, every distraction, every excuse. Stand in the unbroken presence of your own power. Let the mind, the body, and the spirit align in deliberate, unyielding action. Build yourself daily with no compromise, no concession, no delay. The person you are becoming demands it. The life you are capable of living depends upon it. The world will not grant you discipline. It will not grant you courage. It will not grant you clarity. You must claim them. Refuse tolerance. Embrace mastery. And let Stoicism notebook be the witness to your unrelenting ascent. This is not optional. This is not temporary. This is the forge of your life. What you tolerate is who you become. And today you decide who that will be.